When the gavel echoed through the courtroom, its sharp crack was instantly swallowed by the sickening thud of the bailiff slamming an innocent man against the heavy oak benches. A collective gasp swept through the gallery, thick with shock and disbelief, as the victim, blood already pooling at the corner of his lip, offered a chilling, knowing smile and whispered, "You have no idea what you just did." The smirk vanished from the bailiff's face mere seconds later when the mahogany doors burst open and federal agents swarmed the aisles. It was clear he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The Monroe County District Court smelled of old floor wax, stale coffee, and quiet desperation, a place where futures were decided in minutes, often without a second glance. Room 304, presided over by the notoriously harsh Judge Harlan Voss, was widely considered the belly of the beast. But the real danger in Room 304 didn't sit behind the elevated mahogany bench. He stood by the gallery doors, hands resting lazily on his utility belt. Deputy Silas Grant was a man who thrived on authority. Standing 6'2" with a barrel chest and a buzz cut that gripped his scalp tightly, Grant had a reputation. Among local defense attorneys, he was known as the enforcer, a bailiff who routinely used intimidation, racial profiling, and unnecessary physical force to maintain order. Over the years, he had accumulated numerous excessive force complaints. All of them had been quietly dismissed by Judge Voss. The courthouse ecosystem protected its own, and Grant operated with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he was untouchable. Sitting quietly in the third row of the gallery was Dominic Vale. He didn't look like a man who could dismantle an entire judicial empire. He wore a faded green bomber jacket over a plain gray t-shirt, dark denim jeans, and scuffed work boots. A navy blue baseball cap rested on his lap. He was a powerfully built black man in his late 30s, his posture relaxed, but his dark eyes sharply observing every microscopic detail of the room. He was currently watching Judge Voss sentence a young first-time offender to the maximum penalty, ordering the kid into a privately owned probation program that unofficially kicked back a substantial profit share directly into Voss's offshore accounts. Dominic wasn't a worried family member, and he wasn't a defendant waiting for his docket number to be called. Dominic Vale was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Public Corruption Task Force. For years, he had been working deep undercover on Operation Blind Justice, a massive federal RICO sting aimed at tearing out the rotting roots of the Monroe County judicial system. He was here today to observe, to document, and to serve as the final eyewitness to Voss's blatant procedural violations before the FBI dropped the hammer. Hidden beneath his faded jacket, taped securely to his ribs, was a state-of-the-art encrypted audio transmitter. On his left wrist, masquerading as a cheap digital watch, was a biometric panic button tied directly to a heavily armed FBI hostage rescue team idling in an unmarked tactical van a few blocks away. Dominic's mandate was simple: watch, record, and leave. But Deputy Grant was bored. The morning docket had been too quiet for his liking, and his eyes began scanning the gallery for a target to assert his dominance over. His gaze stopped on Dominic. To Grant, Dominic was an anomaly. He wasn't dressed in a cheap suit like the defendants, and he didn't have the exhausted, defeated look of a family member. He sat with the quiet confidence of a man who wasn't afraid of the room. That confidence irritated Grant on a cellular level. Furthermore, earlier that morning, a bulletin had gone out for a fugitive named Tyrone Banks, a tall, muscular black man wanted for parole violation. Tyrone Banks had a neck tattoo and was in his early 20s. Dominic had 0 tattoos and was nearly 40, but in Grant's prejudiced, power-hungry mind, close enough was all the justification he needed. Grant stepped away from the double doors, his heavy leather boots thudding against the linoleum aisle. He moved with the slow, deliberate swagger of a predator cornering prey. Several people in this gallery noticed the shift in his demeanor. Evelyn Lang, an overworked public defender sitting in the front row waiting for her client's case, turned around. She immediately recognized the malicious gleam in Grant's eyes. She had seen it before, usually right before someone was dragged out of the courtroom bleeding. Dominic saw him coming. His peripheral vision tracked the bailiff's approach, but Dominic didn't react. He casually kept his eyes forward, watching the judge. He knew exactly what was happening. The psychology of a bully was predictable. "Hey!" Grant barked, stopping at the edge of the wooden pew where Dominic sat. His voice was a harsh rasp that cut through the low murmur of the courtroom. "You stand up." Dominic slowly turned his head. He looked up at Grant, his expression perfectly neutral. He didn't flinch, didn't scramble to obey, and didn't show an ounce of fear. "Is there a problem, deputy?" Dominic asked, his voice low, calm, and resonant. "I said stand up, boy," Grant sneered, resting his right hand ominously close to his taser. "You don't ask questions. You do what you're told in my courtroom." Up on the bench, Judge Voss glanced over his reading glasses. He saw his bailiff harassing a spectator. Instead of intervening, the judge simply took a sip of his water, adjusted his robes, and went back to writing his notes. It was silent permission. Dominic calculated his options in a fraction of a second. If he showed his federal badge now, he would blow a multi-million-dollar, multi-year federal investigation just to save his own pride. The wiretap warrants, the financial subpoenas, the entire RICO case hinged on catching Voss in the act today. He couldn't break cover. He had to play the part of a regular citizen. "I'm just here observing the proceedings, deputy," Dominic said evenly, remaining seated. "Court is open to the public. I haven't disrupted anything." Grant's face flushed a deep, ugly red. Nobody defied him. Not here. He leaned over the pew, his foul breath washing over Dominic's face. "You match the description of a fugitive. Tyrone Banks. Now you're going to stand up, put your hands behind your back, and come with me, or I'm going to drag you out of this bench by your teeth." "My name is not Tyrone Banks," Dominic replied, his voice remaining terrifyingly steady. "I have my ID and my wallet in my back pocket. If you'd like to see it, I can slowly reach back and hand it to you." "You reach for anything and you're getting tased," Grant snapped, his ego entirely blinding his judgment. The bailiff didn't want an ID. He didn't want the truth. He wanted compliance. He wanted to break the confident posture of the man sitting in front of him. The tension in room 304 suddenly skyrocketed. Evelyn Lang stood up from the defense table. "Deputy Grant, he's not doing anything wrong," she interjected, her voice echoing nervously. "Shut your mouth, Lang, or I'll hold you in contempt," Grant roared, snapping his head toward the lawyer before turning his furious gaze back to Dominic. Dominic realized the situation had passed the point of de-escalation. The bailiff was looking for a fight, and he was going to manufacture one regardless of what Dominic did. Dominic took a slow, deep breath. He let his right hand slide off his thigh, his fingers brushing against the cold steel face of his digital watch. He pressed his thumb against the side button. Click. The silent alarm was triggered. A few blocks away, a team of highly trained federal agents received the green light. But until they arrived, Dominic was entirely on his own in the lion's den. "Last warning," Grant hissed, unfastening the leather strap over his taser. "Get up." Knowing that a deployment of the taser could potentially fry the delicate transmission wire taped to his ribs, Dominic decided to comply with the physical order, but strictly on his own terms. He didn't rush. He moved with deliberate, unhurried grace, pushing himself up to his full height. When he stood, Dominic was exactly eye level with the bailiff. The proximity seemed to rattle Grant slightly. He was used to people shrinking away from him. Dominic didn't shrink. He stood like a pillar of granite. "I'm standing, deputy," Dominic said. "Now I'm going to turn around and we can walk out into the corridor to clear up this misunderstanding." "You don't dictate the terms to me," Grant exploded without warning. The bailiff lunged. He reached out with both hands, grabbing the collar of Dominic's bomber jacket, intending to violently yank him forward over the wooden partition of the pew. In a standard situation, Dominic's muscle memory would have taken over. As a former Navy SEAL and current FBI defensive tactics instructor, he could have broken Grant's grip, swept his legs, and had the deputy unconscious on the linoleum in less than 2 seconds. But Dominic's mind was anchored entirely on the mission. He could not assault a uniformed officer, even a corrupt one, in an open courtroom while deep undercover. He had to be the absolute indisputable victim. Dominic offered zero resistance to the pull. He allowed himself to be yanked forward, stumbling out of the pew and into the center aisle. The gallery erupted into gasps. "Stop resisting!" Grant yelled. It was the classic rehearsed battle cry of a dirty cop manufacturing a narrative for the cameras and the witnesses. Dominic held his hands up, palms open and empty, visible to everyone in the room. "I am not resisting," Dominic said loudly, ensuring his voice carried to the back of the room and directly into his hidden microphone. "My hands are up." Judge Voss finally banged his gavel, though not to stop the assault. "Bailiff, clear this disruption from my courtroom immediately," the judge bellowed, providing official judicial cover for the violence. Encouraged by the judge's command, Grant grabbed Dominic by the back of the neck, his heavy fingers digging into the agent's skin, and violently shoved him toward the heavy oak doors leading to the holding corridor. Dominic maintained his balance, stumbling forward but keeping his feet firmly planted beneath him to avoid falling face first. Evelyn Lang pulled out her smartphone and hit record. "Judge Voss, he's not resisting. You're letting him be assaulted," she cried out. "Bailiff, confiscate that phone. One more word, Miss Lang, and you'll spend the weekend in a cell," Voss shouted, his face purple with outrage. Grant ignored the lawyer. He was completely fixated on Dominic. He shoved the undercover agent through the swinging wooden doors, out of the public view of the courtroom, and into the dimly lit concrete-walled holding corridor. This was Grant's sanctuary. There were no cameras back here. This was where the deputy taught his lessons. The doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the noise of the gallery. The silence in the hallway was thick and heavy. Grant slammed Dominic chest first against the concrete wall. The impact rattled Dominic's teeth, but he immediately positioned his forearms against the wall to absorb the brunt of the force, protecting the wire on his chest. "You think you're tough, huh?" Grant panted, driving his forearm into the back of Dominic's neck, pressing his face against the rough cinder blocks. "You think because you got a little muscle, you can stare me down in my house." "I told you," Dominic said calmly, his voice slightly muffled against the wall but remarkably unstrained. "You have the wrong man. Check my wallet." "I don't give a damn about your wallet, Tyrone," Grant growled, pulling his taser from its holster. He pressed the hard plastic muzzle directly against Dominic's lower spine. "I'm going to light you up, and then I'm going to write a report saying you swung on me. And you know who's going to believe you? Nobody. Because Judge Voss has my back." Dominic smiled against the concrete, a cold, razor-sharp smile. Grant had just confessed to falsifying police reports and colluding with the presiding judge directly into a live, FBI-monitored recording device. The final puzzle piece of the RICO case had just elegantly snapped into place. "Deputy," Dominic said, turning his head slightly so his right eye locked onto Grant's face, "you're making a catastrophic mistake." Grant laughed, a cruel, guttural sound. "The only mistake here is your mother having you. Now put your hands behind your back before I fry your nervous system." Dominic slowly lowered his arms and placed his hands behind his back. He felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into his wrists as Grant ratcheted them down painfully tight, cutting off the circulation. "There we go. Nice and compliant," Grant mocked, jerking Dominic around by the chain of the cuffs so they were face to face. Grant raised his fist, preparing to deliver a brutal, unprovoked punch to Dominic's stomach. Dominic didn't flinch. He just stared into Grant's eyes. "3, Dominic whispered. Grant paused, his fist hovering in the air. "What did you say?" 2. A low, rhythmic vibration began to hum through the heavy concrete floor. It was a sound Grant had never heard before in his courthouse. It sounded like a stampede. 1, Dominic finished, the blood from a small cut on his lip catching the dim fluorescent light. "Hold on tight, deputy." Before Grant could process what the countdown meant, the solid steel security door at the far end of the holding corridor violently buckled. Boom! The sound of the breaching ram was like a bomb going off in the enclosed space. The reinforced hinges shattered, and the heavy metal door flew off its frame, crashing onto the linoleum floor in a cloud of dust and pulverized drywall. Through the smoke and debris, shadows moved with terrifying synchronized precision. They weren't local cops. They were men clad in heavy olive-drab tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and ballistic helmets. The yellow block letters emblazoned across their chests read, FBI! FBI! Nobody move! Drop your weapons! The deafening roar of a dozen highly trained federal agents flooded the narrow hallway. Red laser sights cut through the dusty air, painting Deputy Grant's chest, forehead, and shoulders. Grant froze, his heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped bird. The taser slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the floor. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He slowly raised his hands, completely and utterly paralyzed by the sudden overwhelming show of lethal force. From the center of the tactical formation, Special Agent in Charge Donovan Reed stepped forward. Reed was a veteran agent whose piercing blue eyes had stared down cartel bosses and corrupt politicians alike. He holstered his sidearm and walked briskly down the corridor toward Grant and Dominic. At the exact same moment, chaos erupted out in the main courtroom. Through the swinging oak doors, Grant could hear the distinct sound of more federal agents storming room 304. FBI! Everyone remain in your seats! Keep your hands where we can see them! A voice boomed over a bullhorn in the gallery. Up on the bench, Judge Harlan Voss dropped his pen. His jaw went slack as 6 heavily armed agents bypassed the wooden partition and surrounded his bench. Harlan Voss, step away from the bench and keep your hands visible, an agent commanded. What is the meaning of this? Voss sputtered, trying to summon his usual tyrannical authority, though his voice cracked pathetically. I am a sitting judge. You have no jurisdiction. Federal warrant, Your Honor, the agent interrupted, slapping a thick stack of stapled papers directly onto the judge's mahogany desk. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Back in the holding corridor, Special Agent in Charge Reed stopped in front of Grant. He didn't even look at the bailiff right away. He looked at Dominic. You good, Vale? Reed asked casually, his tone shifting from tactical commander to a coworker checking in on a friend. Dominic let out a long breath, rolling his shoulders as much as the handcuffs would allow. I'm good, Donovan, though I think my wrists are going to bruise. He likes them tight. Grant's eyes darted between the FBI commander and the man he had just assaulted. His brain was misfiring, desperately trying to compute the reality of the situation. Vale? Who the hell is Vale? Grant stammered, his voice reduced to a pathetic squeak. His name is Tyrone Banks. He's a fugitive. Dominic turned to look at the bailiff. The facade of the quiet, submissive observer was gone. He stood up completely straight, radiating the absolute authority of his true rank. Dominic Vale, Supervisory Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Dominic said, his voice echoing cleanly in the hallway. And you, Deputy Grant, are under arrest. Reed reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a key. He stepped behind Dominic and smoothly unlocked the handcuffs. The heavy steel bracelets fell to the floor. Dominic rubbed his wrists, stepping away from the wall. Arrest? Grant gasped, taking a step back until his shoulders hit the concrete. For what? For an investigative stop? You can't do this. I have qualified immunity. I'm an officer of the court. You are an officer of the court, Reed corrected, stepping into Grant's personal space. Now you're just a suspect. And we're not arresting you for an investigative stop, Silas. We're arresting you for systematic extortion, perjury, witness tampering, assault under color of law, and racketeering. We've been listening to your phone calls for quite some time. We have your bank statements. We know about the kickbacks Judge Voss gave you from the private probation companies to act as his personal muscle. Grant's knees buckled slightly. The bravado, the bullying, the untouchable aura. It all vanished in a millisecond, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, broken man realizing his entire life was over. You set me up, Grant whispered, staring at Dominic. I didn't set you up, Dominic replied coldly. I just gave you the rope. You decided to tie the knot. You chose to target a man sitting quietly in the back of the room because of how he looked. You chose to assault him. You chose to threaten him with falsified reports. I just happened to be wearing a wire. Dominic reached under his bomber jacket and pulled off the small rectangular audio transmitter taped to his ribs, holding it up so Grant could see the blinking green light. Every word you said in this hallway and in that courtroom was broadcast live to the United States Department of Justice, Dominic added. Reed signaled to two of the tactical agents. Cuff him! The agents stepped forward, grabbing Grant by the arms. They weren't gentle. They spun him around, slamming him against the exact same concrete wall he had just shoved Dominic into. They pulled his arms behind his back, securing them with heavy steel handcuffs. Grant didn't fight back. He didn't say a word. He just stared blankly at the floor, breathing heavily as the Miranda rights were read into his ear. Dominic pushed open the swinging oak doors and walked back into the main courtroom. The scene was chaotic but perfectly controlled. FBI agents were securing the perimeter, collecting computers and corralling courthouse staff. In the front row, Evelyn Lang was still standing, her phone tightly gripped in her hands, her eyes wide with absolute shock. She looked at Dominic, recognizing the man who had just been dragged out in handcuffs now walking freely alongside heavily armed federal agents. Dominic caught her eye, gave her a polite nod, and gently tapped the side of his nose. Up on the bench, Judge Voss was in handcuffs, being escorted down the steps by two agents. The judge looked completely deflated, his luxurious black robe suddenly looking like a tragic costume. As they led Voss down the center aisle, he locked eyes with Dominic. "This is a witch hunt," Voss hissed, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." Dominic stopped, blocking the aisle. He looked down at the disgraced judge, the man who had ruined countless lives for profit. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Harlan," Dominic said softly. "Inmate number 84729. Have a safe trip to federal lockup." The agents marched the judge out the main doors right past the gallery of stunned spectators who were just beginning to realize they had witnessed the spectacular decapitation of the most corrupt courthouse in the state. Dominic adjusted his jacket, walked over to the defense table, and picked up his navy blue baseball cap. The sting was over. The takedown was complete. But the fallout from Operation Blind Justice was only just beginning. In the wake of the operation, the Monroe County Courthouse looked less like a hall of justice and more like a war zone. Dozens of marked and unmarked federal vehicles formed an impenetrable steel barricade around the building's perimeter. Yellow FBI crime scene tape fluttered in the afternoon breeze across the grand marble columns of the courthouse steps. Above, the aggressive thumping of news helicopters chopped through the air, their cameras broadcasting the unprecedented raid live to millions of stunned viewers. Inside, the bureaucratic machine of the county had ground to a complete, terrifying halt. Every bailiff, clerk, and stenographer had been sequestered in the ground floor cafeteria, their cell phones confiscated, waiting to be interviewed by federal agents. Dominic Vale stood in the center of Judge Harlan Voss's private chambers, wiping a speck of drying blood from his lower lip with a sterile alcohol pad. The judge's office was a monument to unearned arrogance. It smelled strongly of aged leather, expensive bourbon, and imported Cuban cigars. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with pristine, unread legal volumes meant to project an image of scholarly wisdom. "Tacky," Special Agent in Charge Donovan Reed muttered, using a gloved hand to push a framed photograph of Voss shaking hands with the governor flat onto the mahogany desk. "Guy lives like an absolute king on a public servant's salary. It's almost insulting how little he tried to hide it." "Arrogance is a hell of a drug, Donovan," Dominic replied, tossing the bloodied alcohol pad into a wastebasket. He walked over to the judge's massive desk. Voss believed he was the law. When you think you're the law, you stop worrying about who's enforcing it. A team of FBI forensic data technicians, utilizing state-of-the-art extraction tools, were already hard at work dismantling Voss's desktop computer. But Dominic wasn't interested in the obvious digital footprint. A man like Voss running a multi-million-dollar kickback scheme with private probation companies wouldn't keep his real ledger on a courthouse server. Dominic slowly paced the room, his eyes scanning the intricate woodwork. As a former Navy SEAL and veteran investigator, he knew how to look for the things that didn't belong. His gaze locked onto a heavy, ornate humidor sitting on a side table near the window. It was perfectly polished, but the alignment of the brass hinges was a fraction of a millimeter off-center. Dominic pulled on a pair of blue nitrile gloves, walked over and opened the humidor. The rich scent of cedar and tobacco filled the air. He carefully removed the cigars, setting them aside. He pressed his fingers against the bottom panel of the box. It was completely solid. But when he applied pressure to the top left corner, there was a faint, almost imperceptible click. "Donovan, bring a spudger over here," Dominic called out. Reed jogged over, handing Dominic a thin metal pry tool. Dominic slipped it into the microseam he had just exposed and popped the false bottom loose. Underneath lay 3 encrypted military-grade titanium flash drives and a small, worn black moleskin notebook. Reed let out a low whistle. "Bingo! Let's get these to the cyber unit." Before handing the notebook over, Dominic flipped it open. The pages were filled with handwritten dates, initials, and astronomical dollar amounts. But what caught Dominic's eye wasn't the money. It was a list of names under a column aggressively underlined in red ink and labeled liabilities. At the very top of the list, circled twice, was the name Evelyn Lang. "Donovan, look at this," Dominic said, his voice tightening. Voss wasn't just laundering money. He was keeping a hit list. Minutes later, Dominic was sitting across from Evelyn Lang in a vacant, windowless witness consultation room. The young public defender looked exhausted. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched a paper cup of lukewarm water. She was still processing the fact that the man who had nearly been beaten to death in front of her was actually a federal agent. "Ms. Lang," Dominic started, his tone gentle but serious. "I need to ask you a few questions about your caseload in Judge Voss's court." Evelyn looked up, her eyes wide. "I didn't know anything, Agent Vale. I swear. I just thought Voss was strict. I thought he hated my clients." "He didn't hate your clients, Evelyn. He hated you," Dominic said softly. He slid a photocopy of the ledger page across the metal table. "In the time you've been practicing here, you have the highest conviction and maximum sentence rate of any public defender in the district. Did you ever wonder why?" Evelyn swallowed hard, staring at her name circled in red ink. I thought I was just a bad lawyer. I thought I was failing them." "You weren't failing them. The game was rigged against you from the start," Dominic explained, leaning forward. "We've been tracking the private probation company, Sentinel Correctional Services. They charge exorbitant monthly fees to parolees. If the parolee can't pay, they get sent back to jail, and Sentinel gets a state subsidy. Voss was deliberately assigning you the most vulnerable defendants, fast-tracking their convictions, and funneling them directly into Sentinel's meat grinder. And because you were so relentless in filing appeals and digging into the sentencing disparities, Voss flagged you as a liability." "Yeah." Evelyn's face went pale. "A liability?" "He was building a case to have you disbarred, Evelyn. He was going to plant evidence in your office to frame you for witness tampering," Dominic said, pointing to a set of shorthand notes at the bottom of the page. "You were getting too close to the pattern. You actually cared about the law, which made you the most dangerous person in his courtroom." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, a mixture of profound relief and simmering, absolute rage. The years of self-doubt, the sleepless nights crying over clients she thought she had let down, it had all been a manufactured nightmare, orchestrated by a monster in a black robe. "What do you need me to do?" Evelyn asked, her voice dropping the tremor and replacing it with pure steel. Dominic smiled slightly. "I need you to tell me everything you know about District Attorney Preston Hale, because a judge can't rig a courtroom this thoroughly without the prosecution playing ball." Miles away, deep inside the heavily fortified FBI field office in downtown Capital City, Deputy Silas Grant was experiencing a reality check of monumental proportions. He sat handcuffed to a steel ring bolted to a heavy metal table in Interrogation Room B. The bravado he had displayed in the courthouse was entirely gone, replaced by the nervous, sweaty desperation of a cornered animal. He had been sitting in the freezing, hyper-air-conditioned room for hours without a sip of water. The isolation was a standard tactic designed to let a suspect's imagination tear them apart before the interrogator even walked through the door. The heavy steel door clicked open. Dominic Vale walked in, no longer wearing his undercover street clothes. He was dressed in a sharp, perfectly tailored dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle blue tie. The transformation was jarring. He looked like the absolute embodiment of federal authority. Dominic carried a thick manila folder and a sleek silver laptop, which he set down on the table with a loud, deliberate thud. Grant flinched. Dominic didn't sit down. He stood over the table, silently staring at Grant for a long, tense moment. "I want my union rep," Grant finally blurted out, his voice cracking. "I want a lawyer. You can't interrogate me without representation." Dominic slowly opened the laptop and pressed a button. "Silas, you fundamentally misunderstand your current situation. A union rep handles labor disputes and paid administrative leave. You are currently facing charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Your union abandoned you the second they saw the live footage of you assaulting a federal agent. As for a lawyer, you are welcome to one. But by the time a public defender gets down here, the train will have left the station." "What train?" Grant sneered, trying to summon a fraction of his old courthouse swagger. "You got me for a bad shove. That's a misdemeanor battery at best. I'll be out on bail by midnight." Dominic let out a dark, humorless chuckle. He reached into the manila folder and pulled out a glossy, high-resolution photograph. He slid it across the table. It was a surveillance photo of Grant standing in a dimly lit parking garage, accepting a thick manila envelope from a man in a tailored gray suit. "That is Roland Pierce, CEO of Sentinel Correctional Services," Dominic said coldly. "And that envelope contained $25,000 in sequentially marked, non-consecutive $100 bills, a direct cash kickback for ensuring 30 of Evelyn Lang's clients were intimidated into accepting maximum sentence plea deals in recent weeks. We have the wiretap audio of you coordinating the drop. We have your bank records showing the deposits into your Cayman Island shell account." Grant stared at the photo, the color draining from his face. The sweat on his forehead suddenly felt like ice. I was just following orders," Grant stammered, the classic defense of a coward. "Voss made me do it. If I didn't play ball, he would have fired me." "That's exactly what Voss said about you," Dominic replied smoothly, dropping the ultimate psychological hammer. Dominic hit play on the laptop. The audio was crisp and clear. It was Judge Harlan Voss's voice, recorded less than an hour earlier in Interrogation Room A, just down the hall. "Grant was a rogue element," the judge's recorded voice echoed through the small room, dripping with aristocratic disdain. "He was the one extorting the probation companies. I was completely unaware. He used the authority of my courtroom to run his own personal mafia. The man is a violent thug. I am fully prepared to testify against him in exchange for immunity." Dominic paused the audio and closed the laptop. He leaned down, resting his palms on the metal table, bringing his face inches from Grant's. "The prisoner's dilemma, Silas," Dominic whispered. "You and the judge are in separate boxes. The first one to give me actionable intelligence on the rest of the network gets the deal. The second one gets 50 to life in a maximum security federal penitentiary, where I guarantee you the general population will love to meet a former bailiff." Grant started breathing heavily, his chest heaving as a full-blown panic attack set in. The ultimate betrayal had just happened. The man he had protected, the judge who had shielded his excessive force complaints, had thrown him to the wolves without a second thought. "He's lying!" Grant shouted, rattling the handcuffs against the steel ring. "Voss ran everything. He kept a secondary ledger. He kept blackmail on the district attorney. I know about the ledger." "I already have it, Silas," Dominic said dismissively, standing up and turning toward the door as if the interview was over. "You have nothing I need. Enjoy prison." "Wait! Wait!" Grant screamed, desperate to maintain any shred of value. "The icebox! You don't know about the icebox!" Dominic stopped, his hand resting on the heavy metal doorknob. He didn't turn around immediately, letting the silence stretch, forcing Grant to sweat. Slowly, Dominic looked over his shoulder. "What is the icebox?" It's a storage unit out in the desert near the county line." Grant panted, words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Voss didn't trust digital files for the really sensitive stuff. The blackmail photos of District Attorney Hale, the actual physical cash reserves, the fake passports. It's all in a climate-controlled locker at a place called Desert Safe Storage. Unit 404. Dominic turned around, his expression unreadable. Who holds the key? Voss does. But there's a pickup scheduled for tonight. Pierce's fixers are supposed to clear it out. They got spooked by a grand jury subpoena last week. They're moving all the cash and the blackmail material out of the county at midnight. Dominic's voice vibrated with adrenaline. Write down the exact address, the gate codes, and the names of the fixers Pierce employs. If you leave out a single detail and one of my agents catches a bullet tonight, I will personally ensure you are housed in the same cell block as Tyrone Banks. As Grant frantically began to write, Dominic hit the comms unit in his ear. Reed, it's Vale. Spin up the hostage rescue team. Get the choppers fueled. We're going hunting tonight. The real war for Monroe County wasn't over. It was just moving into the dark. The Mojave wind howled across the desolate stretch of highway, kicking up violent swirls of red dust that battered the reinforced windshield of the FBI command vehicle. 2 miles ahead, sitting alone in a vast expanse of scrub brush and cracked earth, was Desert Safe Storage, a miserable, forgotten facility surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence topped with concertina wire. In the back of the command vehicle, the red tactical lights bathed Dominic Vale and Special Agent in Charge Donovan Reed in a crimson glow. They were surrounded by operators from the hostage rescue team, fully kitted in heavy black ballistic armor, quad-tube night vision goggles, and suppressed M4 carbines. Drone feed is live, the tech agent whispered from the front console, tapping a ruggedized monitor. A high-resolution infrared aerial view of the storage facility filled the screen. We have one heat signature on site, a single vehicle parked near row unit 404. Dominic narrowed his eyes at the screen. Grant had said the fixers were scheduled to arrive at midnight. It was earlier than anticipated, and a lone vehicle didn't fit the profile of a corporate cleanup crew. Zoom in on that vehicle, Dominic ordered. The camera magnified the glowing white heat signature. It wasn't a tactical SUV or a cargo van. It was a luxury sedan, a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Reed, Dominic said, his voice tightening with realization. The corporate fixers aren't here yet. That's District Attorney Preston Hale. He found out the FBI raided the courthouse, panicked, and decided to beat Pierce's men to the locker to destroy his own blackmail files. If Hale burns the contents of that locker, the entire RICO case against Sentinel Correctional Services goes up in smoke. Reed grunted, slapping the magazine into his rifle. We move now. Hold, Dominic countered, pointing at the top edge of the monitor. 2 large, rapidly moving heat signatures were tearing down the access road with their headlights blacked out. Pierce's cleanup crew just arrived. They're running on night vision. They're about to box the DA in. The situation had just evolved into a volatile 3-way collision. Dominic threw open the heavy steel doors of the command vehicle. HRT, stack up. We have an armed corporate hit squad converging on a hostile civilian. Rules of engagement. Identify your targets. Return fire only if fired upon. Let's move. Dominic and the tactical team sprinted across the desert floor, their boots crunching softly against the gravel. They moved like phantoms, their IR lasers cutting invisible lines through the pitch-black night. Inside the perimeter of the storage facility, the scene was rapidly deteriorating. District Attorney Preston Hale, a man used to the pristine safety of his country club, was frantically slamming a crowbar against the heavy reinforced padlock of Unit 404. He was sweating profusely through his expensive designer suit, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. Suddenly, the screech of heavy tires echoed through the metal corridors. 2 matte black Chevrolet Suburbans skidded to a halt at the end of row D, blocking the only exit. 4 men piled out. They weren't wearing masks. They were dressed in dark tactical clothing, armed with short-barreled shotguns and heavy assault rifles. These were Roland Pierce's problem solvers, led by a ruthless ex-mercenary named Garrett. "Step away from the locker, Mr. Hale," Garrett called out, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls. He casually racked the pump of his shotgun. The metallic clack-clack sounded like a death sentence. Hale dropped the crowbar, spinning around with his hands thrown in the air. "Garrett, wait! I'm just getting my files. You can have the money. You can have all of it." "Mr. Pierce sends his regards, William," Garrett said coldly, raising the shotgun to his shoulder. He felt you were becoming a liability. Nothing personal, just a corporate restructuring. Garrett's finger tightened on the trigger. Bang! But the gunshot didn't come from Garrett. It came from the darkness behind him. A flashbang grenade detonated in the center of the alleyway, with a blinding 100 million candle power flash and an ear-shattering concussive boom. The blast knocked Hale to the concrete and sent the four fixers stumbling backward, blinded and deafened. FBI, drop your weapons! Do it now! Dominic materialized from the smoke like a vengeful ghost. He didn't hesitate. As Garrett swung his shotgun blindly toward the sound of Dominic's voice, Dominic closed the distance in 2 massive strides. He grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, violently wrenching it upward, and delivered a devastating palm strike directly to Garrett's chest plate, sending the mercenary crashing into the side of the Suburban. Laser sights painted the remaining 3 fixers from every conceivable angle. Overwhelmed, outgunned, and still completely disoriented from the stun grenade, the mercenaries dropped their rifles and dropped to their knees, lacing their fingers behind their heads. Hale was curled into a pathetic ball on the asphalt, sobbing uncontrollably. Dominic walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel, and looked down at the district attorney. "Preston Hale," Dominic said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Dominic turned his attention to Unit 404. The lock had been badly dented by Hale's crowbar. Dominic signaled HRT Breacher, who stepped forward with a heavy set of bolt cutters. With a loud snap, the padlock gave way. Dominic grabbed the corrugated metal handle and heaved the rolling door upward. Even for a seasoned federal agent, the sight was breathtaking. The locker was easily the size of a 2-car garage. Stacked neatly on wooden shipping pallets in the center of the room were shrink-wrapped bricks of bundled cash, millions of dollars in extorted probation fees scrubbed clean from the books. But the real prize sat on a metal folding table in the back, a towering stack of meticulously organized manila folders, external hard drives, and photographs. Dominic walked over and opened the first folder. It was a comprehensive ledger detailing every kickback Roland Pierce had ever paid to Judge Voss, D.A. Hale, and half the county commissioner's board to keep their private probation monopoly running. "Checkmate," Dominic whispered. He tapped his earpiece. "Command, this is Vale. The icebox is secured. Send the evidence trucks. It's time to cut the head off the snake." The next morning, the sun rose over Capital City, reflecting off the sleek glass exterior of the Sentinel Correctional Services headquarters. Roland Pierce sat at the head of his massive polished mahogany boardroom table on the 40th floor. He was a man who looked exactly like the corporate monster he was. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than most of his probationers made in a year. He was currently screaming at his frantic legal team on speakerphone. "What do you mean you can't reach Garrett?" Pierce bellowed, hurling a crystal heavy-bottomed whiskey glass against the wall where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I pay you people millions of dollars in retainers. Find out what happened at the storage facility." Before the lead counsel could answer, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. They weren't opened by a secretary. They were pushed open by Dominic Vale. Dominic strode into the room, flanked by Special Agent in Charge Reed and 4 other heavily armed federal agents. Today, Dominic looked nothing like the man who'd been assaulted in room 304, and nothing like the tactical operator from the desert. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit, his federal badge clipped prominently to his belt, projecting the absolute terrifying authority of the United States government. "Roland Pierce," Dominic announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Pierce stood up, his face flushing with arrogant rage. "Who the hell are you? You have no right to barge into my private offices. Security!" "Security is currently handcuffed in the lobby," Dominic replied smoothly, walking the length of the massive table. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and casually tossed a thick, heavy manila folder directly onto the polished wood in front of Pierce. "I'm Supervisory Special Agent Dominic Vale, and I'm here to inform you of a massive corporate restructuring." Pierce looked down at the folder, then back up at Dominic, trying to mask his sudden sharp spike of terror. "I am the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar state contractor. If this is about that mess with Judge Voss, you're wasting your time. My legal insulation is airtight. I have layers of plausible deniability. Plausible deniability only works when your co-conspirators keep their mouths shut, Greg, Dominic countered, resting his hands on the table and leaning in close. Voss gave up your bagman, Grant. Grant gave up the icebox. And Preston Hale. The DA was so terrified of your hit squad last night that he signed a 70-page sworn confession the moment we put him in an interrogation room. We have the ledgers. We have the hard drives. We have the physical cash. And we have Garrett, who is currently flipping on you to avoid the lethal injection for attempting to murder a district attorney. Sisala, Pierce's arrogant facade completely shattered. He collapsed back into his plush leather chair, the color draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The realization that his empire had been entirely dismantled overnight paralyzed him. You built a fortune on the backs of desperate, vulnerable people, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. You turned the justice system into a meat grinder for profit. That ends today. Reed stepped forward with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Roland Pierce, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, wire fraud, and the bribery of public officials. Stand up and turn around. As the cold steel clicked around the billionaire's wrists, Dominic turned and walked out of the boardroom. The raid was fully underway. Agents were carrying boxes of hard drives and files out of the executive suite. The heart of the corruption had been ripped out. In the weeks that followed, the landscape of Monroe County had fundamentally changed. The federal indictments fell like a rain of fire. Judge Harlan Voss, D.A., Preston Hale, Silas Grant, and Roland Pierce were all denied bail, locked in federal solitary confinement, awaiting trials that would surely result in life sentences. The private probation contracts with Sentinel were immediately voided by the governor, and thousands of predatory convictions were overturned. Dominic Vale stood across the street from the Monroe County Courthouse holding a cup of steaming black coffee. The yellow FBI tape was finally gone, but the building felt different, lighter somehow. The heavy glass doors pushed open and Evelyn Lang walked out. She wasn't carrying her usual battered, overflowing briefcase. She carried a single neat leather portfolio. She spotted Dominic across the street and walked over, a genuine, unburdened smile lighting up her face for the first time in years. "Agent Vale," Evelyn said warmly. "Ms. Lang, or should I say, Interim District Attorney Lang," Dominic replied with a grin, tipping his coffee cup to her. The governor had appointed her to clean up Hale's mess, recognizing her as the only honest lawyer in the building. "It's going to take years to fix the damage they did," Evelyn said, looking back at the courthouse. "But for the first time when I walk into that building, I actually believe in what we're doing." "That's all it takes, Evelyn. One person who refuses to look the other way," Dominic said. He checked his watch. "I have a flight to catch. Another county. Another corrupted judge. The work never stops." "Thank you, Dominic, for everything," she said softly. Dominic nodded, turned, and walked down the bustling sidewalk, disappearing into the crowd. The quiet observer, the phantom of justice, moving on to the next shadows. And that is exactly how a corrupt empire falls. If this real-life, adrenaline-pumping takedown had your heart pounding, hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who loves seeing arrogant bullies and corrupt officials get a brutal dose of reality. The justice system is crazy, and we cover the wildest, most satisfying true stories you'll never see on the mainstream news. Smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the action. Sound off in the comments. What was the most satisfying moment of the takedown for you? Stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.